talking about a lot of interesting aspects of the transition in Sudan today, starting with a look at some of the norms and ideas of people who've been affected by the transition. I'm going to only be up here briefly. We've got some good Sudanese experts, as well as Sudanese, to lead us through today's presentation. And I've asked Ambassador Alan Golty to chair the session for me. I've done that because, as you probably know, he's an expert in his own right. He's been the UK ambassador to the Sudan and special envoy to Darfur in his past posts. He's also served in Tunisia as ambassador, and I think your involvement in the Sudan goes back to the 70s. I mean, for a long time. 72, yes. So he's seen a lot of changes there. So with no further ado, just an official welcome to you all. We love having you here, and let me turn it over to Alan to manage the program today. Alan?
Thank you very much, Steve, and welcome to everybody. Let me explain very briefly what we're planning to do. Tim McCullough on my left, the photographer and inspiration of the book that I hope you're all going to acquire. I'm not sure I'm allowed to say buy, am I? Are you selling it? Anyway, the book, which is the feature of our meeting today, he's going to tell us a little bit about the background to the book, read one or two of the contributions or parts of the contributions, excerpts from the contributions from the 16 Sudanese who have contributed their thoughts on Sudan's identity and so on, and then update us with a slideshow with, I guess, some more different pictures. So I'm looking forward to that very much. One of the contributors on the Sudanese side will be our next speaker, Jock Madut Jock, who is Undersecretary of the Ministry of Culture in South Sudan, and as I say, a contributor to the book. So he will respond briefly to what Tim tells us and add some thoughts of his own. And then we'll have, I'm very glad to welcome back to the Wilson Center my co-chair of the Sudan Policy Group, Ambassador Nuruddin Sati, to give us I won't say a northern perspective, because that would understate Nuruddin's love of Sudan and expertise in all aspects of things Sudanese, but will give us his reaction. And then I think we should have a good hour, or up to a good hour, for discussion, questions, comments, and so on. So without more ado, or rather without more ado, except to say that Tim is lavishly supported by members of his family who are more than welcome here at the Wilson Center. We'll invite Tim to talk to us.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming, and thank you to the Wilson Center for hosting this event. My name is Tim McCullough, and I've been working and photographing in Sudan and now South Sudan for the last 5 years with the UN mission there. I had a unique opportunity to travel around a country that was until recently the largest in Africa and equal in size to the United States east of the Mississippi. Sudan was also one of the most geographically and culturally diverse nations on earth. I envision this book to be a peace-building tool and a way for Sudanese to see the totality of their own country that very few had an opportunity to experience. This book is not about promoting unity or separation, but rather to document the country that existed and the period of time leading up to its division. The book photographically covers all 25 states of what used to be Sudan and combines images of the rich diversity with the opinions of a range of Sudanese citizens. I received written contributions from 16 academics, thinkers, and writers from a representative but by no means exhaustive group of Sudanese citizens. The contributions were based on the following questions and are a combination of political analysis, personal reflections, poetry, and fiction. How do you define Sudan, and how does Sudan define you? What is Sudan to you personally, culturally, and politically? Who is a Sudanese? what does it mean to be a Sudanese? I'll now read a few excerpts from the contributions and then move on to some of the images. What does it mean exactly to be Sudanese? To be among Arabs, too African, and among Africans, too Arab. To have a disposition towards deep loyalties, more often than not, a self-effacing nature and a discerning eye. To possess aspirations not always compatible with resources, and most unsettling of all, the ability to hold a grudge for years. But it is the specific details that brand us, the knowing, a mid-morning break for Fatur, a fantastic dust storm, the smell of a bride, and a dusty, sweating child coming home tired and reeking of school. That's from Layla Abu Layla. One finds it intriguing that, although Sudanese identity appears to be intensely disputed and thus fragile, in practice it is tenacious and overpowering. It is even more so in exile. Sudanese, from various ethnic backgrounds, congregate and display their legendary conviviality, effortlessly forgetting what divides them and dwelling instead on what binds and unites them. I wish they could also do so at home. Abdul Wahab El-Effendi. The geographical reality of the Sudan is defined by its international borders, largely crafted by foreign powers in their national interests in the late 19th century. Internally, however, a myth of what Sudan should look like, rather than what it actually is, has been created in the last 50 years. And it presents a false identity of the Sudan as an exclusively Islamic and culturally Arab nation in the heart of Africa. This mythical Sudan is a country that I, and I believe millions of others, would not willingly wish to be a part of. That's Jacob Akol. Culture is a vehicle that makes us more tolerant in the handling of difficult and trying times. It makes us warm up to each other and focuses our minds on the need to overcome conflicts on the basis of managing diversity. And in the face of those whom we find ourselves in conflict with, we resort to our cultural heritage, which tells us to engage and not fight them, but seek to settle and resolve conflicts for the sake of the nation. Abdullah Adam Khater. This next one's a poem. Let me tell you, despite all the talk about my Arabism, my religion, my culture, I am a Nuba. I am black. I am African. Africanness is my identity. It is entrenched in my appearance, engraved in my lips, and manifested by my skin. I shall crown my identity with knowledge. I shall build my civilization, and at that time I shall extend my hand. I shall forgive those who tried to destroy my identity because my aspirations are love and peace. Yusuf Kua. As a Sudanese citizen, it is my God-given place to live, and the South is my home. It is host to my people, my traditions, my culture, and my ancestors. I underwent my primary and secondary schooling in the South. I learned the language, culture, and the economy and politics of Sudan. But as I progressed and received a higher education, I began to notice underlying differences, conflicts and tensions among the Sudanese people. Different citizens living in different regions were treated differently. As a Southerner, I began to question my identity. Did I belong to Sudan, or did I only belong to the Southern Sudan region? Marian Yao Lang. In the course of my travels, I met country folk unblemished by the political propaganda found in Khartoum and other large towns. Visits to local Quranic schools revealed the betrayal of the people's right to education. Though the pupils could recite the many verses of the Quran faultlessly, they could not read or write the Arabic language. It was during meals shared inside traditional tents made of animal skins that I realized how neglected our local people had been by Khartoum. East, west, north, and south, they suffered the same deprivations amidst abundant national wealth. It was the exploitation of people's ignorance that made them easy prey to rule. In spite of suffering the longest armed conflict in Africa, and having been caught up in it during almost the whole of my lifetime, Sudan remains extremely dear to me. To be a Sudanese involves many different meanings. Until now, it has meant that you belong to the largest country in Africa. It also means belonging to a multicultural, multiracial, multilingual, and multi-religious society. Sabrina Farajallah. However diverse Sudan may be, there is always an invisible thread that runs through this diverse mosaic, binding the various elements together. It is interdependence, an adhesive force created by the people for the people. It transcends all constitutional labels, like federalism or confederalism, or even separation. Politicians may sometimes forget it, but neither the Southerners who ran away from a vicious war in the South or the northern nomads who spend 8 months a year in the South are likely to forget or forsake it. But this thread sometimes comes under great pressure and is overstretched to the breaking point. Today, we have come to a crossroads, with Southern citizens opting for separation to set up their own independent state. This requires wise and far-sighted handling if we are to maintain this interdependence that safeguards the interest of both Southerners and Northerners. And that's from Majub Muhammad Saleh. So I'd now like to show some pictures from the past 5 years. This is my first full day in South Sudan. This woman her husband had been killed the night before by a group, unknown armed group, suspected to be LRA but it wasn't really known. About 200 people were killed in a series of attacks around Juba and the roads leading to Kenya and Uganda. This is October 2006. And it kind of showed how limited the reach of the government of South Sudan was, that they couldn't control immediately across from the capital. This is a soldier from the Joint Integrated Units, the third army that was created by the CPA, half SPLA, Sudan People's Liberation Army, half SAF, Sudan Armed Forces. This is the graduation of former SPLA being trained as South Sudan police in Torit, Eastern Equatoria. This is the remnants of fighting in Malakal in late November 2006. It was the first conflict between the two armies and the first major challenge to the CPA. Over 200 people were killed in a week of fighting. This is President Bashir and First Vice President and President of South Sudan, Salva Kiir, at the second anniversary of the CPA in Juba. This is in North Darfur, in a place called Umrai. And these are SLA commanders and soldiers at a meeting with the AU and UN special envoys in one of many failed peace attempts in Darfur. This is the tomb, the mausoleum of Dr. John Garang in Juba on the second anniversary of his death in July 2007. This is in Awin Kabul in Eastern Equatoria State, and it gives you a sense of the infrastructure that this is the school. This is during a rally in support of the SPLM decision to withdraw from the Government of National Unity. This was in October of 2007, protesting about failure to implement certain provisions of the CPA, ABA, while sharing various other issues. They were out of the government for 2 months, and this was the second major challenge to the CPA. This is the Paloich oil facility operated by Petrodar, which is a company. The two major holders of it are the China National Petroleum Company, CNPC, and Petronas. It's in Upper Nile State. This is in Ed Dain, South Darfur, and these are Dinka IDPs from northern Bahr Ghazal who fled war and famine and found relative safety in Darfur, loading their belongings to return home. March 2008. This is again Eastern Equatoria, Magui County. In the back are SPLA parading because they're redeploying. The LRA LRA is the Lord's Resistance Army, Ugandan rebel group that had been operating throughout Sudan and now through Congo and Central African Republic. This is the LRA at peace talks, GOS-sponsored peace talks that were hosted by Vice President Riek Machar. They ultimately ended in failure. This is on the border of Western Equatoria and Democratic Republic of Congo. This is Omdurman, and following the 10 May attack by GEM on the capital, these are weapons that were captured from GEM being displayed to residents and citizens in Khartoum and Omdurman. From the 13th until the 20th of May 2008, there was intermittent fighting leading to the destruction of Abyei town and the displacement of all its residents, 50,000 people that fled south. These are people moving south. The vast majority of them moved about 40 kilometers south and into Warab State. This is during a food distribution on the Agok airstrip. A young Dinka Nok girl displaced from Abyei. And this is the other side of Abyei. These are Missouriya. This is a Missouriya girl who had just arrived at their dry season homes. The migration takes them from further north, and they come down following the rains and with their cattle. Following the destruction of Abyei, a roadmap was signed on the 14th of June, 2008, which demilitarized Abyei of SAF and SPLA and replaced them with JIUs. And a part of that agreement was that the SAF and the SPLA had to move out of Abyei. This here is actually General Peter Gadet, and he was brought in to reinforce the SPLA after the initial attacks. Gadet has spent most of the past year fighting against the government of South Sudan and has recently rejoined them, so it kind of gives you a sense of the shifting alliances and allegiances that take place in South Sudan and Sudan as a whole. These are the SPLA preparing to move south. This is in a wheel, northern Bahr Ghazal, and seasonal flooding that has been exacerbated by road construction without proper drainage. So, plus many of these people are returnees who come to areas that they're not aware they flood on an annual basis. This is a Nuer man with traditional scarification in Bentiu, Unity State. This is a Missouriya woman in an area called Todach, which is about 30 kilometers north of Abyei town. This young girl is from Dinka Twitch in Warab State, and they had actually moved their cattle north to Abyei town because in that year, in 2009, there was heavy rains in Warab, so they actually moved north and brought their cattle to graze in Abyei. These are the three cities, Khartoum, Bahri, and Omdurman, at the confluence of the Nile. And this is Juba, capital of South Sudan. This is in Kauda. So young children in their homestead on the rocky slopes of the Nuba Mountains that has been bombarded since June the 5th on aerial bombardment and fighting that has been going on for the last 3 months. An elderly Nuba woman outside of Kauda. This is the Episcopal Church in Juba when they were choosing a new bishop. And a mosque in Khartoum, or actually in Omdurman, that is next to the tomb of the Mahdi. These are children displaced by LRA attacks in Western Equatoria, which continue to this day. These are Dinka Nok residents of Abyei celebrating the announcement of the PCA, Permanent Court of Arbitration announcement, which was meant to be a final and binding agreement on Abyei. And this is when the PCA had defined the borders of Abyei. These are residents of Duke Padit in Jonglei State. This is September 2009. They had recently been attacked by the Lo Nuer. 160 were killed in the village, and this is during a very deadly year in South Sudan, and the deadliest except for 2011 since the CPA, and there were more than 2,000 killed, primarily in Jonglei State. This is the funeral of Major Mabior Ding, who was the SPLA commander in Duke Padid, and he was killed during that attack. This is his burial at his homestead in Rumbek in Lake State. This is in Jikmir, Upper Nile State. These are Jikan Nuer young girls, and in between the two that are running across is a young woman whose dowry was just negotiated. These are the pyramids of Jebel Barkal and the historic Nubian city of Napata in Karima, northern state. This is Muhammad Ahmed, a very nice man, and he's in Abri in Nubia. This is a view of Sese village in the Nile from ancient Nubian ruins in northern state. This is station number 4 on the Khartoum to Wadi Halfa train line. The train was originally built by General Kitchener from 1895 to 1898 during the Anglo-Egyptian attack on the forces of the Mahdiya and the reconquest of Sudan by the Anglo-Egyptian forces. This is a conductor's office on the same train line in River Nile State. This is a Beja camel herder guiding his animals to a water point in Erheb, Red Sea State, in October 2009. This is the container terminal and the terminus of the oil pipeline, seen from the Corniche in Port Sudan, Red Sea State. This is a woman collecting water from a lake in Bao, which is in the Ngesana Hills in Blue Nile State, also now experiencing conflict that began on Friday. Traditional musicians in Gaysan on the Sudan-Ethiopian border, and now also a place where people are fleeing into Ethiopia. This is a young girl in Roseris, just across the Blue Nile from the state capital in Adamazin. It's fishing on the Yabus River on the border of Ethiopia. Again, the people have been, many have been displaced from this area. This is Mundari women in Terekeka, and during the visit of Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter has 2 primary things that the Carter Center do. One is guinea worm, the other is electoral monitoring. 90% of global cases of guinea worm are in South Sudan, and they're endemic in this area. This is an aerial view of a homestead in Kwajuk, the capital of Warrap State. Salva Kiir cast his ballot in the national elections on the 11th of April, 2010, in Juba. National election monitors monitor and observe the balloting in Juba. The 27th of May, 2010, President Bashir is sworn in again at the National Assembly in Omdurman. This is at the Kanana Sugar Company, which is the world's largest white sugar plantation, and it's a worker loading animal feed, which is one of the byproducts of the production in White Nile State. This is the call to prayer at a Sufi mosque in Umayyadan in Sinar State. This is a Sufi celebration that was anointing a Sufi sheikh. So this was one of the stranger days I had in Sudan. It's dangerous to be around ostriches, AK-47s, and Sufis at the same time. So. This is Gedaref, the central market in Gedaref at sunset. This is outside of Kassala, a Rashida elder. A seasonal worker walks amongst a crop of chili peppers in the Jazeera scheme. The Jazeera scheme is one of the largest irrigated areas in the world, and it's south of Khartoum between the Blue and the White Nile. This is bringing goats to the water in Umbaru, North Darfur State. UNAMID peacekeepers conducting a 1,000-kilometer trip through the 3 Darfur states. It was the longest patrol the mission had ever done in June 2010, and this is passing through Kulbis, Western Darfur. This is a man walking through a hubub, or a dust storm, in Kulbis, Western Darfur. This is the northern portion of the Jebel Mara Massif, east of Kabkabia, which is a very mountainous area in Darfur and one of the most fertile. Children chase a goat into a wadi or a dry riverbed in Saraf Omra, northern Darfur. This is in Kalma camp, one of the largest IDP camps in Sudan and in the region, and this is one of the few working water points, and women are lining up. These are 2 oil company headquarters flanking a newly built mosque on the banks of the White Nile in Khartoum. This woman is from the Mbororo tribe, who are a Falata people originally from West Africa, but have been living in Sudan for hundreds of years. This is in Wau, Western Bahr Ghazal. SPLA soldiers parading at a base on the border of South Sudan and South Darfur during a visit of the governor and the division commander. And it's in a place called Timsaha, Western Bahr Ghazal. These are traders at the El Obeid commodity market. Sudan produces the vast majority of the high-quality gum Arabic produced in the world. And most of it passes through this market. This is on the 4th of January of 2011, and this is President Bashir's delegation leaving Juba on the final negotiations leading up to the referendum. So when this plane left and there were statements that the referendum was going to go ahead, then it was clear it was going to happen. Senior leadership of the government of South Sudan, including Salva Kiir, Vice President Riek Machar, watching the plane depart. These are some of the many South Sudanese who flooded home in advance of the referendum. This woman is a Jikan Nuer who came by road from Khartoum to Malakal and was waiting for onward transport to her home. This is the Secretary General of the SPLM, speaking to the SPLM Youth League on the eve of independence, 8th of January. This is the first woman voter in the South Sudan referendum. And following President Kiir, who voted at the polling station at Jongarang's mausoleum, she was the next to go. And South Sudanese waited all night, stayed in line singing and dancing. And this is also in Juba. So this was the other side. This is Blue Nile State. So while there was intense joy in South Sudan, the citizens of Blue Nile got citizen hearings as a part of the popular consultation process. And what they're holding are cards with numbers on them. So they would then be given a chance to speak about whether the CPA had met their aspirations or not. So it was quite a contrast to see the intense joy in South Sudan contrasted with the two areas of Blue Nile, Nubama, and South Kordofan, which didn't even receive this much. This is a man registering at the citizen hearings. This is in Musfa in Blue Nile State. Following the referendum, and as the CPA drew to a close, one thing that needed to happen was the dissolution of the joint integrated units. So, and then their soldiers were returned to their mother armies. The joint integrated units operated throughout South Sudan and the three areas, as well as in Khartoum. This is the SAF contingent of the JIU departing Juba on the 7th of April, 2011. This is a couple hours to independence in Juba. This is President Kiir and Vice President Riek Machar arriving at the independence celebration. Guests crying as they sing the national anthem for the first time. And the SPLA Honor Guard raises the South Sudan flag as an independent nation. Well, thanks again for being here today and listening to me. I hope this presentation has provided you with a better understanding of the diverse cultures and peoples of Sudan and the conflicts that have blighted the country.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. That was absolutely fascinating and a bit of a challenge even to those like myself who know a little bit about Sudan as to where we were geographically here and there. But I'm sure we appreciated the quality of the photographs and the power of the story. Jock, you were one of the contributors to the book. You are one of the contributors. Would you like to give us a few thoughts in response?
Sure. Thank you very much, Alan, and thanks to all of you for coming. It's a person with such artistic talents that can make hardship and suffering both heart-wrenching and pleasing to the eye at once. Suffering can also be beauty in artistic forms. When I was coming over here this afternoon, the taxi driver asked me where I was from. And I replied to him that I am a red-blooded American. What makes you, why must you assume that I'm not from here? This is interesting because obviously identities, individual or tribal or national identities are made, are created. And so Sudanese and everybody else in the world always are responsible for the making of their identities. And so the making and remaking of identities done by individuals can also be seen happening at the national level, where nations create their sense of national identity. The breakup of Sudan into South Sudan and the Republic of Sudan is rooted in the crises of national leadership in forging an identity of Sudan that can accommodate everyone. All the cultural differences, all the religious differences had vied for a sense of representation in what becomes the national identity of Sudan, but this has not happened. Both for the diversity that is depicted here, but also because of the national policies that have picked one of these identities and tried to make it the identity of all. So the result of it is that some people who don't want to be considered part of that identity conceived by a few and imposed over everyone else had to break away. This is really the story behind the breakup of Sudan into two entities now. For many people in South Sudan, the rump state, the Republic of Sudan, will always remain as North Sudan. The reason for this is not to undermine or to belittle the viability of the Northern Sudanese state, but to also say that we may have politically broken away from this entity, but we are socially and culturally connected still. Most particularly because there are, obviously, cultures don't know boundaries. Just as much as I can say in America that I am an American and I have brought with me aspects of South Sudanese culture to America, South Sudan is still going to hold on to some aspects of culture that were not indigenous to South Sudan and may have been influences from the North. And likewise, for the North, some of you know that there were up to, of course, estimates vary, but it was said at one point that there were 4 million South Sudanese in the North. And they've lived there for a generation. Prior to that, there were a lot of labor migrants that went to Khartoum for over 50 years and worked in construction and worked as domestic servants and civil servants and all sectors of the economy. They have left a lasting impression on what now remains as the culture of North Sudan. So I see it in some of these images that the two countries, South Sudan and the Republic of Sudan, will continue to share these aspects of their cultures that they have exchanged. A lot of South Sudanese will also say that, well, North Sudan is also, it is no right for people around the world to say that the Sudanese government, the National Congress Party, is upset for losing a part of its country. Well, it was not part of anybody. I mean, South Sudanese have also lost. They have lost the beauty of geography of the North. They've lost the connections that they have had with people in the North. And they have lost property, as they are now currently being kicked out by the current government. A lot of Southern Sudanese have left behind houses and friendships and services that they might not be able to get in rural South Sudan, because these are people who came from rural areas and now they are being expected to go back to their original homelands. Obviously, they are not going to go back to their villages. A lot of them are going to end up, as Tim showed, in setting up slums around big towns in South Sudan, and that is a loss to them. But South Sudan has embarked on a plan to forge its own national identity, something that would encompass all the different ethnic and tribal identities and religious identities, taking off from the conviction that nations are made, are not born. And just as much as individuals can create their identity, nations can also build what will become a national identity. And my own involvement in the government of South Sudan is focusing on this very endeavor to transform the state of South Sudan into a nation of South Sudan. The two are not always the same. Nation building is definitely one side of the coin from state building, but they are different. Nation building is about people. State building is about infrastructure. So in terms of nation building, the project that we are working on in South Sudan is to ask the question as to what it is that binds or glues together the over 60, 70 different ethnic groups of South Sudan? What is it that you can point to and say, this is a South Sudanese practice, or something that all South Sudanese can rally around? The reason for creating this, of course, is towards the state building, because if you have 67 to 70 ethnic groups, all of whom were brought together by the shared history of opposition to the North, and were bound together by the unity of purpose, which is to oppose the government in Khartoum. Now that that opposition has borne fruit, the question, of course, is what is it that is going to keep South Sudanese as one people going forward? Because the unity they have so far was a kind of negative unity, a unity of opposition to the North. There are several things you can do as a nation to build symbols of nationhood around which people can unite. Some of these symbols are small and straightforward, such as the national anthem, which in the days leading up to the declaration of the independence, the national anthem was being disseminated and sung all across South Sudan with a sense of gusto and pride. And that can lead to a sense that South Sudanese belongs to an entity, that you belong to a bigger entity beyond your tribe, that your citizenship in the nation is far greater than your citizenship in your ethnic group. And that is what South Sudan will need in order to forge an identity, but also in order to create stability and cooperation between all the different ethnic groups. Otherwise, without that history of oneness based on opposition to the North, you could easily find yourself using the ethnic divides as the basis for competition for public office, as the basis for competition for distribution of services, and that has potential for unraveling the stability and the unity of the state. And so you have these small symbols like the national anthem, the flag, the name of the country, and of course the choosing of South Sudan to become the name of the independent state was deliberately to keep that aspect of us in South Sudan being part of the body politic called Sudan. It's to say that we are making political independence, but we are not obviously going to fold up South Sudan and drive it away from Sudan. We are still going to be connected by land and by cultures, by histories that are, by intermarriages, by shared resources. So South Sudan has become a name that people can rally around. And the goal of the new state is to institute policies that will, in the end, get people to graduate from their ethnic citizenship into national citizenship, so that when you choose a minister from a particular area, nobody is going to quarrel and say you chose that minister because he or she is a member of your tribe, because the citizenship in the nation is the defining factor. But this has challenges, obviously, because in addition to these small symbols of nationhood, there are bigger things. One of these bigger projects is what may be called South Sudan History Project, because even that history that had united South Sudanese for so long is also contested, and it is divisive. As some people say, we fought for 25 years to make this possible. You didn't fight, so you don't deserve a service. There are people who will say, yes, I may not have fought on the battlefront, but I paid for this to be possible through feeding the armies, or being attacked by Khartoum government during the war, because if you are a southerner, you are fair game as far as the NCP government is concerned and the governments before it. So people in South Sudan will contest this history. So in order for some sense of unity or agreement on the boundaries of this history, it is a national project for the nation to come up with a kind of a national history, with a kind of official history. I mean, of course, the academic historians will go on forever bickering over dates and the boundaries and all of it, but there are two types of histories. There is the more professional history, and then there is the official history. And the official history now says that South Sudan has been at struggle to become independent for 192 years, since Muhammad Ali's invasion of Sudan in 1920. So in 1820. So that is an official history. Historians will say, but you know, South Sudan didn't really put up an army against the Mahdis or against the Turks or against, so how is it a Southern Sudanese struggle? But that is the period that the state has recognized as the beginning of actions by the central state that has united South Sudanese. And so commemorating that history is part of the national project that is aimed at forging a sense of national collective identity. Equitable representation and display and celebration of all the various ethnic groups through cultural centers, through museums, through war memorials that incorporate all the different ethnic groups too, so that you have a diverse country, but a diverse country that has an umbrella that brings all of them together. That is the project that is. But the challenges to this project are many. One of them, of course, is the legacy of the war. South Sudan continues to suffer a great deal from violence. As North and South were fighting this big war, many South Sudanese say that there were many mini wars that were going on within that big war. And these mini wars have not been resolved by the North-South deal. And unless South Sudan, as a government, as a people, work towards resolving these mini wars, that divisive ethnic identity is going to continue for quite some time, because even the sense of national cohesion or even the sense of belonging to a political entity is still quite easy for a lot of people, because the tribe is still very more prominent than the nation. Some people don't even know. They don't even relate to the idea of being Sudanese or South Sudanese, because their universe ends with the boundaries of their tribe. Another challenge, of course, is the NCP actions, the actions of the current government in North Sudan. Many South Sudanese and a lot of Northern Sudanese are disappointed that the transition to two states has not translated into cordial relations that were expected of the two ruling parties, the NCP in the north and SPLM in the south. That the historical and social interactions that have happened between Northerners and Southerners have not continued to transcend the political boundaries the way that many people had hoped it would happen. So the attitudes of the NCP, the economic war that it has unleashed on the South, the blocking of the trade routes, the embargoing of all the goods to be shipped to the South, have led to a lot of suffering in South Sudan today. I mean, we still don't know the post-separation issues that are being negotiated, where they are going to end up. And so the identity of South Sudanese is still in flux and is still being forged. The only thing that is visible that you can touch and that you saw in these images is that we are all brought together by the suffering that we have experienced at the hands of the central government in Khartoum, but now currently the responsibility to dispense violence is being transferred to the new government in South Sudan. And the challenge is, how does the new government of South Sudan establish a system that will protect people from this suffering, whether it is violence, physical violence, or violence of deprivation? I think that's all I have to say. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nuruddin.
Good afternoon, everybody. Now, you know why Jock has been selected to be Undersecretary of Culture. It's really a pleasure to be back at Woodrow Wilson and to share these moments with you, and to be with my good friend Jock here, that I congratulate for the excellent choice that has been made by his government, and I wish him well. Me too, I have taken a taxi this morning while coming here, and the taxi driver asked me, "Where are you from?" So I scratched my head and I looked at him and I said, "I'm from Sudan." And then he said, "Which one?" North? No, he said, "The old or the new?" I didn't know what to answer, actually. Scratched my head and I said, "The old new one." Then he looked at me and he said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes." Well, anyway, to say that many people also around the world are sharing our bewilderment also about our own what's happening to us. This morning, when coming to this meeting here, I had the pleasant surprise to discover that Tim McCullough is married to the daughter of a very dear friend of mine, Charles Mannion. And I am very happy that to have met her. Charles remembers Steve and Alan. He was one of our colleagues who came to one of our meetings of the Sudan Working Group upon our invitation a few months back. That has been a very emotional moment for me, I have to admit, because I have known Charles since 1966, Khartoum University, when he was a basketball star. And he was really, in the... I met Charles the last time when he was Undersecretary of Humanitarian Affairs. And I took to him a common friend, Ambassador Hirui of Ethiopia. And Hirui is a good friend of Charles also. And then we started talking about the possibility of secession and all that then. Hirui asked Charles, "Where are you from?" And before Charles answered, I said, "Charles is from Khartoum. I have always known him here. I know he has been here for the last 50 years. So maybe he has another identity. I know he has another identity, but he will always, for me, Nuruddin, he will always belong here as a Khartoum boy." And this is something that shows us, the drama that we are living. The painful drama that we are living, as having seen our friends, work with us, grow with us, play with us at certain times, and then all of a sudden there is this tragedy of having to go our different ways. But as Jock was saying, it's our duty to see to it that despite the independence of South Sudan, that we should have the wisdom of keeping the two peoples together. Unfortunately, the signs are there that there are those who want to divide the two people, to tear them apart, but also there are forces that we want to bring them together. Despite the political secession, we hope that we'll continue our efforts to come together. Let me also commend Tim McCullough for the magnificent effort that he has exerted in producing this magnificent book, which is the last probably book in which we are going to see Sudanese together in one place as Sudanese. It is a historical document in this sense. Maybe it's the last such book where the Sudanese, North and South, have been depicted together in one volume, in one book, and I think I will really keep the copy that Steve gave to me the other day, and he asked me not to return to him, but hoping that we'll get another copy, so I hope he's going to get that. Now, on the issue of this afternoon, the issue of identity. I am one of those who wrote about this issue since the 70s. In 1979, I wrote 3 articles in Sudanese Culture magazine, where I said, we can be from North, we can be from South, we can be African, we can be Arab, but we can be Muslim, we can be non-Muslim or Christian or otherwise. But at the end of the day, we are all Sudanese. And we belong to one country which is called Sudan. And our identity has to be identified on the basis of what we call a Sudanawiya in Arabic, which is Sudanism. And I said the last 2 sentences of those 3 articles were precisely, there are 2 ways to go. One regressive way in which we would like to impose identity from a central point on each and everybody. And this is going to be resisted. It's not going to be accepted. And the result will be war, and it will be suffering. The second option is that we'll have a progressive and forward-looking vision of what our identity really is. Opening up to others, recognizing diversity of the society. And this, at the end of the day, will lead to peace and harmony in the society. 30 years later, we have made one choice, which unfortunately was the wrong one, which has taken us to where we are now. And Sudanism or Sudanawiya was very simple, that wherever you come from, you live in Sudan, you belong to a Sudanese society, going well, hoping to be a nation. As Jock, I agree with Jock that we have been a country, but we have not been a nation, and nation building has failed. And one of the reasons why nation building has failed is precisely that we have been trying to impose a certain identity on the country. And identity, we know very well, cannot be decreed. It cannot be decreed. Nobody can just come and say, our identity is one, X, Y, and Z, and then they expect everybody to fall in line. It does not happen that way. What really happens is that in situations of diversity, such as that of Sudan, where you have religious diversity, ethnic diversity, regional diversity, linguistic diversity, all kinds of diversities actually, at the end of the day, the identity of the people is the sum of all these diversities. It cannot be reduced to a single way of looking at things. You cannot tell the people that I have decided for you that you are going to have such an identity. It's impossible. The second thing, which is very important, identity should not be looked at as being about the past only. It's more about the future. My former boss at UNESCO, Federico Mayor, wrote a book entitled The Memory of the Future, in which he was saying it's good to have memories. It's good to have to look at our past and cherish our past. Glorify it even. That's very important. To look at that past in the memory, in the mirror of the future. That we are looking together towards the future, while at the same, the past inspires us, but we should not remain the prisoners of that past. Unfortunately, this is what's happening in Sudan today, and what's happened. We remain the future, the prisoners of our past. A past that we glorify, that we cherish more than we cherish our present day, more than we cherish our future. And Sudan is not alone in this. If I look around and I see many countries are committing the same mistakes, whether in Africa or in the region. Countries with a strong culture tend to have this culture as a hurdle, tend to look at it as something that stands between them and their future, and between them and their happiness. Stipulations of the past, rules of the past, rulings of the past come and stand between us and our happiness and what we want to achieve. It's for this reason that we have to find a way to deal with this past. How do we deal with this interrelation between the past, the present, and the future? This is very important. Some countries who are luckier than us have been able to resolve that dilemma, and that's why they are where they are now, and where we are where we are now. We have not been able to resolve this conundrum. We have not been able to resolve this dilemma of dealing with our heritage and with our past. And identity in Sudan, for example, has always been considered from a kind of an emotional, kind of semi-academic, idealistic kind of thing. Something that you carry in your head, in your mind, in your heart, you move around with, that has nothing to do with the others. You pursue it in complete isolation of the others. It becomes an element of decisiveness, of solitude. It's not an element of cohesion, of building a society which is in peace with itself. It's used as a weapon or a fortress to fight others, or to protect or preserve yourself from others. While as identity is not about that. Identity is about sharing and caring and living with others and finding a common ground so as to move forward and to live together, to achieve things together, to do things together. This becomes the new identity for a people, where they recognize themselves in their achievements. And the real source of glory becomes what the society achieves, not our forefathers have achieved 1,000 years ago. Despite the importance of that, we keep ourselves reminded of that. Our basic principles, yes, the values remain with us, but the values have to be reenacted. They have to be readapted to this changing world. The world is changing, and we are stagnating and moving backward while the world is moving forward. The other important issue is that if identity is left to the, I would say, the whims of the others, to be identified in a whimsical manner, it becomes a factor of division. That's why rule of law is so important. At the end of the day, what keeps a country together, what keeps a nation together, of course, apart from the basic values, the shared values, is how these values are being practiced within a given society. There should be certain rules, laws, to which everybody, yardsticks by which you measure the humanity of people. It doesn't become ethnicity or regionalism or whatever. Our shared humanity should be reflected in our constitution, in our laws, which should be enforced also. In countries like the United States, it's a diverse society. It's diverse cultures, people coming from all horizons. But they are not fighting over what color I am or what where am I coming from, where you are coming from. What language you are speaking, what language. They have left this, it is there. They look at it as something important. But what is even more important is how we live together today as a nation. How to progress, how to become creative, inventive, and create a new nation. And be an example and a model to the world. How to become a rainbow nation as South Africa has become. And Sudan should have been a rainbow nation well before South Africa, actually, because we had this opportunity 50 years ago, but we squandered it. The other thing, the issue of history, because Jock has mentioned, well, I'm one of those who have been working on the general history of Africa, the history of Burundi, and other histories. History is very important. It's very, very important. But people have to agree how this history is going to be passed to the new generations. How are we going to educate our people our history? It's not enough that historians continue fighting about dates and events and personalities. And history generally is a history of war, unfortunately. All nations tend to glorify their own history. So education is very important. It is the vehicle by which history is being passed over to the coming generations. And history is also about the future. It's not about the past only. How do you convey these values? How do you inspire yourself by these events that have taken place in the past in order to carry over whatever is positive and convey it to the future generations? Tim McCulloch's book has put together a number of thoughts, and I was very happy to see that some of the contributors are very good friends of mine. And some of the thoughts that they have expressed, I totally agree with. The issue of tolerance, the issue of diversity, Africanness, love and peace, the issue of neglect, interdependency is very important. I have been working on a project of interdependency with Dr. Lual Deng when he was Minister of Oil. Dr. Lual Deng is one of those who understood the importance of interdependency. And unfortunately, he came to the Ministry of Oil a little bit late. He should have come since 2005, and things would have changed, I think. Bringing together people from the border areas, Miseria and Dinkangok, and working in the border areas with the oil companies, in order to see what are the possibilities of this interconnectedness. Well, I know that I'm too talkative. I'm sorry, Alan. So, well, let me stop here, maybe, and we can come back to the discussion. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank Tim, even at this early stage in our meeting, and our two commentators for stimulating what I hope will be a very rich discussion. It seems to me that we've got two themes. One is the broad question of identity, Sudanese, Southern Sudanese, and how that will be developed, how it can be developed in the future. And I think we'd very much like to hear from some of the other Sudanese present as to how they react to what they've heard. And the second theme, which is not, of course, unrelated, is the future of relations between North and South, which is looking, as all our speakers have indicated, more problematic than ever. Associated with that, the particular difficulties of the three areas who do not have an easy answer to this very problem of identity. If Jock and his colleagues are working to create a southern Sudanese identity. Where does that leave the Nuba? Is there going to be a door held open in identity terms for them? And the same question one might put to Khartoum. Are the Nuba going to be welcomed into the New Sudan Republic? So those, it seems to me, are very deep issues which are worth exploring, and I will invite you to make your contributions. Please, if you be so kind, we're running a bit over, but I didn't want to interrupt our speakers sooner. Keep them short. It would help us very greatly if you would preface your remarks by saying who you are and if you wish to declare an affiliation. I think we have a microphone, so perhaps you could wait for it. There's a lady here whose microphone is arriving.
A little intimidating. Thank you, and thank you all. Very remarkable moment. My name is Anita Parlow, and some time back I worked on a report for Human Rights Watch. It was called In the Name of God. It was about 1996 or 8. I had the opportunity to meet John Garang and Riek Machar and Hassan al-Turabi. And in the context of your comments, if I can be a little bit oblique perhaps, I wonder how petroleum fits into the context of both North-South communication and also in terms of the challenge of determining a culture of Sudan, the new Sudan, the new old Sudan.
Thank you. Let's take 2 or 3 more questions and then give our panelists a chance to respond. David Ottaway.
David Ottaway, I'm a senior scholar here. The South, the issue of Islam and Christianity, at least as it was portrayed in the coverage of the war here, was an important issue, and the attempt by the North to impose the Sharia on the South was an important issue for Southerners. In the creation of a sense of identity in the South now, how important is the notion of Christianity as in the definition of identity?
Thank you. Let's take one more. Omar Ismail down here.
Thank you. This is great. Tim, wonderful work. Not to take anything from it, and its artistic beauty. As a Sudanese born and raised in that country, this is hardly represents the place that I knew when I was a child and a young man. And the reason for that is, in my observation of these pictures, very few ones did not have AK-47s in them. And very few of them do not indicate war and the things that are happening. Perhaps this is a sign of what Sudan tend to be today. It is very unfortunate, and we know the reason for that. The reason was the government that chose to have one identity, and apart from that, all the other Sudanese who claim other different identities should be suppressed by force, basically. And that is why we see all these weapons and soldiers and people in fatigue, and the misery of the girl somewhere in southern Blue Nile, or the woman in Darfur, or the Masiriya woman that, in a war zone. So the whole country was turned into Dar al-Harb, the land of war, because and that is basically because of the choice of one identity, and the rest of it is something else, and should be put away. The last observation that I would say, if we look at this identity that this government is trying to impose and look at the faces of the people in these pictures that you have shown us, rarely that we see the people that they try to define the country as to be, the Arabs, basically. All the people that we have seen, even those who belong to the so-called Arab groups in Sudan, they are basically Africans, and the lack of ability to celebrate that our Africanness and our, and the other people that are here are in between, like the Emperor girl and that you've seen in Wow. She came from all the way from way far Western Darfur, because the Emperor live around the Kobom area of Western Darfur, and moving with their cattle all the way down to Western Equatoria, through Western Bahar Ghazal and Wow. This is what Sudan was supposed to be, and I think in our discussion in identity we should look really, really hard on where we went with the country as such, like Nuruddin was saying, and he's very modest in talking about Sudanism. He was the proponent of that and the grandfather of what is defined as Sudanism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, Tim, perhaps you should have written twice as big a book and taken twice as many photographs. But would you like to have a quick response to Omar, and then I'll invite Jock and Nuruddin to deal with the other two questions on Christianity and identity and on petroleum.
Sure. Well, thank you for coming, and thank you for your comments. I don't see misery in the pictures. I see strength coming through difficult situations. And I also don't think that most of them have AK-47s, but when you're looking at the politics of Sudan, you have to look at it with an AK-47 because the gun is what drives politics, and that is what I've been around to see. So, I mean, you look at what proportion of the country is actually in conflict and has been in conflict in the 5 years that I've been there, and what you will see is guns and people who derive their power from weapons. But, for example, you mentioned the woman who's in Bao, and I don't see misery there. I see someone who is in a difficult situation but is dignified and proud. Even the same from Abyei and the picture of the woman waiting on the airstrip. I don't see weakness, and I don't intend to portray people as weak, but to portray them as powerful people because they are surviving very difficult situations.
Thank you. Jock.
Thanks. Just quickly on the oil. Of course, really, I don't think ordinary Sudanese know what is happening in the negotiation rooms between SPLM and CPA regarding oil. We know that the oil is flowing, but we don't know how much the South is paying to the North to rent the pipeline. We assume that it is a lot, perhaps even comparable to the 50% that was already being divided in the 6 years previous. It is that idea of sharing the oil with the North is not sellable politically to the people of South Sudan. So the only thing that the SPLM can do to continue to compromise is to not be transparent on what they are giving the North, and simply say that we are paying a fee to rent the pipelines and to rent the other facilities. How much, what percentage of the proceeds you pay to rent these facilities, nobody will ever know. But I can say this about oil, that of course the oil curse in Africa is ubiquitous here. In South Sudan, one of the things that make oil so awful is the immediate sense that a state has of independence from its people, because you only care about people if you collect taxes from them. If you collect taxes for them, you're bound to answer to them politically. But if you are just getting oil money, you don't have to share it equitably. This is what makes oil so terrible. It's because of that sense that the state is one entity and the people are another. I think this is a danger that we face in South Sudan. So long as we continue to rely on oil for up to 98% of the government budget, political reforms and transition and democracies will take a long time before they come. Especially that in the economy, nothing else matters. So long as you have oil money, You don't have to be so pragmatic in collecting taxes. You don't have to invest in other sectors of the economy, and therefore continuous reliance on one finite source of income, and that does not bode well for the future. In terms of Christianity and identity, I think, yes, religion had become a very, very important factor in the conflict between North and South. It was never always like that, and it actually, in reality, it is not. But it has become so politicized that religion has taken the central stage in this conflict, both on the southern side as you try to sell your conflict to the rest of the world as one of religious atrocities being committed in the South. So you get a lot of faith-based NGOs from the West to come and support you on that basis. And on the other side, when that happens, it gives opportunity for the government in Khartoum to say to the rest of the Muslim world that we are under assault from the infidel West, so you must all come to our aid. This is what has brought religion to be such a strong component of the conflict. It's not that the Sudanese people want to fight over religion. It's the politicization of religion that has brought it to this stage, and that continues to this day, and I think it will continue for a long time. It's what is now, it's already now being invoked in the conflict in South Kordofan, even though majority of people who live there are Muslim. But because there is still Christianity there, President Bashir, as Ambassador Sati was saying yesterday, President Bashir has already gone on record to say that now that the South is gone, nothing else stands between us and an Islamic State. We are now a more homogeneous society. We are going to apply Sharia law. We are going to become Arab. So, but that is, of course, not true in reality of this northern Sudan. You still have Nuba Mountains, you still have Blue Nile, you still have the Red Sea Hills, you still have Nubia in the north. You still have such a diverse country. I mean, before South Sudan broke away, Sudan had 175 linguistic groups. That does not simply become one country just because the South has broken away. So the same things that tore apart Sudan are going to be experienced in what remains of Sudan. And unless there is a sense of reason to try to create a state where everybody is involved, North Sudan is definitely going to continue to break apart. I mean, what will happen to Darfur 5-10 years from now if this situation is not resolved? The Darfuris have never called for separation, but if their requests are frustrated, the way southern grievances were frustrated, of course they are going to opt out of the union. Same for South Blue Nile, same for Darfur, so same for Kordofan. I think it is the responsibility of the current government to save the unity of the remaining part of the country. Otherwise, it will go the same way the South has gone.
Thank you. Nuruddin, do you want to add, or are you going to hold your fire?
Well, I have no fire to hold because I'm a peaceful man. But actually, yeah, well, I do agree with Jock, and I don't think that the issue is the religion itself. It's the issue of the politicization of religion and its use as a weapon in the political realm, the political domain. My fear, well, if I take the example of Sudan, North Sudan, there's a majority of Muslims in North Sudan. And officially, Islam is, of course, the religion of the state. Sharia is the religion of the land. But there is no consensus as to how Sharia can be applied. Even in the north, there is no consensus. It's not only a question of north versus south. Within the north itself, the version of Sharia that has been applied since Nimeri's time has been always contested by a sizable portion of the population. Not because people are not Muslim. But people know that religion is being exploited, manipulated as a weapon in the political realm, the political domain. So my fear that, to answer, maybe attempt to answer Mr. Ottaway's question, my fear is that if the South goes the North way, and if Christianity is adopted as the religion of the land and highlighted as Sharia is being highlighted in the North, that they will end up having the same problems, the same contestation, the same disagreements about how religion can relate to the state, and how and the danger of creating a theocratic state is always there, and it's a danger because whenever somebody comes and tell you, listen, I am here because it's God wants me to be here, then the debate is no longer a political one. It's moved to another domain, another area, which is the area of religion. Oil, of course, is proving itself to be the curse that it was expected to be. Rather to be used in the interests of the people, is being used for other means. The majority of the resources of the two states are used for war. And those pictures, maybe, Tim is right, not too much misery, but it's not the pictures of an oil-producing country. There are not pictures of a country that has been producing oil for the last 10 years. And I have been traveling in some areas of Sudan. I went to Hijlij, I went to Unity, I went to all over the place in these oil areas, north and south. And people remain the same as they were before the discovery of oil. Nothing has happened, no improvement at all. Most of resources are drained to the capitals, and they are used in a way that is not very transparent to them. How is this affecting culture? Maybe that was also part of the question. It's a new culture is starting to appear. Actually, a mixed culture. Because the Sudanese were saying when, my colleagues here would recall 20, 30 years ago, were saying when oil is going to be discovered in Sudan, we'll bring our all of us, and prepare our kufiyas. Because the model was the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia and all that. So having oil maybe will become part of that thing. But this is not happening. It's oil in a poor environment. And this is fueling conflict rather than peace. And fueling a culture of manipulation rather than a culture of divisiveness. A new culture in which money has become very important, too important. Many of our age-old values are being trodden down. So I can continue talking for hours, but we do not have any time, I'm sure, Alan.
Thank you very much. Let's take another round. There's a lady here and a gentleman in the front.
Thank you. I'm Judy Smith from the National Museum of African Art at the Smithsonian, and I have a very simple question for Mr. Jock, and that is, what is the present state of the museum system? Is there one in South Sudan? Is there a museum in Juba, or is there a plan for establishing them in the other states?
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Dave Rabinowitz. I'd like to address the issue of religion again, because it appears to me that religious fundamentalism of any kind, be it Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, or whatever, is inherently inconsistent with democracy. Because if you know for sure the absolute word of God, why would you listen to anybody else or even allow them to speak? And the question is, how do you address a situation like this, and can you actually build a nation without addressing the issue of fundamentalism?
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. And a lady right at the back, we'll take her as well.
Lawrence Freeman from ER Magazine. I direct the African desk. I've been involved in Sudan for about 20 years. The question of lack of national identity, which I agree with is the problem, is also very much related to the problem of lack of national sovereignty. And if you look across Africa, especially the effects of colonialism, because I see similar problems in Nigeria, which I know a little bit about, there is no connection in the person's mind to a nationalist identity, but also those countries under colonialism, the differences in the ethnicities and religion was nurtured and fostered to actually create the inability for that country to be a nation. If you read Malcolm Madani's book, he talks about how the British actually created identities in Darfur so there would be conflict. So how do we get over that past? And the question has to start from the real identity is an identity of each human being as a creative individual, and that nations exist to develop and foster that creativity and productivity of each person. Now, my view of Sudan, I was there just recently in January, and also I spent time in Darfur, is both North and Sudan are in great trouble. And the economic crisis worldwide is compounding that. So my view is, how do you move forward, which Mr. Sati asked. North-South Sudan have to work together on a common mission, and that to me is building the infrastructure platforms of water, power, and energy to grow food, which would be a joint activity of the North and the South. The South is tremendously underdeveloped. The food crisis could topple the government of the South. The economic crisis could topple all the countries in Africa. In fact, the Arab Revolution has already moved south. So the question is, how do we get over those problems and shape a future identity? And I agree with Mr. Sati. I oppose the referendum because I believe all Sudanese are Sudanese. I don't accept the classifications. There may be differences, but they're all Sudanese. So my proposal is, how do we get the North and South to realize that each one of those nations is the most important ally of that nation? Using the principle of the Treaty of Westphalia, the benefit of the other is the benefit of myself. Washington, the West, European Union, I don't think they're going to give any help or any vision at all. They're collapsing right now. Their institutions are collapsing on this financial collapse. They're not going to help. So the countries in Africa have to find ways to work together and look for allies, but without developing the economic infrastructure, which is not, somebody said one part is state, one part is nation. You can't have a nation unless the people are fed, and if you have the two Sudans working together for a common mission of producing food, which Sudan has the greatest arable land in Africa, 80 million hectares. This then establishes a basis for people to work together and shed the differences and the grievances that have existed for so long.
Thank you very much. Just take one more, please.
Yes, my question is actually related. My name is Nolu. I'm a communications specialist with work on behalf of CARE, the Africa Center on Strategic Studies, and a bunch of other places. And that has, I'd like to hear from the panelists on the role of the international donor community. I mean, you know how things normally work when this happens. There's a flood of folk coming in, and how effective can they be? Pretty much addressing the gentleman's question there. And from your perspective, what should their role be? How can they help both North and South achieve the goals that need to be achieved? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll spare the panel the answer to the first question, which is, I think that we all agree with the questioner that if you have a belief system that leads you to suppose that you're right and everybody else is wrong, that's not a recipe for democracy or harmonious life. The question of the way forward, Tim, I don't know if you're willing to put on a UN hat rather than an artistic hat and have a go at that, and then we'll ask our colleagues to have a go at the others.
The way forward?
From the international community, donors, is there anything to be expected, or is Mr. Friedman right that the Sudanese, North and South, have to rely on themselves?
Well, I think primarily they need to rely on themselves, and that the donor community can support that, but unless there are credible partners and that the Sudanese can take care of their affairs themselves, then there's nothing to support. I think a lot of the donor projects tend to be misplaced, mismanaged, and administration heavy, rather than actually getting down to finding effective solutions for people. So I don't know how much more I can add on that one.
Fair enough.
From the UN perspective.
Nuruddin, do you want to add on that before we tackle museums in the south?
No, well, we have had a history in dealing with the international community. Yourself, you have been involved in many of those projects. There were very high expectations that have not been followed through. What I personally expect of the international community in the coming period, the first one is to have an objective look at the situation. This is very important. An objective look at the situation. Call the shots, and when somebody is doing something, either side tell exactly what is happening. I think this is very important. We can only have peace if we have honest brokers who are going to work with both sides to tell them exactly what is happening. Too often we have seen a biased view of the international community. And I have to be very frank, whatever the South does, nothing is happening. And whatever on the North side is done, then everybody is talking about that. And I'm saying that out of care for the South. In Sudan we say, I'm sure we have the English version of that saying, أسمع كلام اللي بيبكيك ما تسمع كلام اللي بيضحكك. Listen to the one who makes you cry, even if he tells you unpleasant things, rather than the one who makes you happy because he's telling things that you would like to listen to. Telling the truth to your partner, to your friends, is very important, to open their eyes to what is happening and to give them a sense of the reality of their own situation. Otherwise, you mislead them. And if you are too condescending, then tragedy will happen. The second thing is, yes, we need support of the international community. It's essential, it's important, but at the end of the day, the international community can do nothing for us if we are not helping ourselves. So the basic thing is that North and South, and I agree with those who are saying they should work together. They should work together. They should be more reasonable, more sensible in looking at their own situation. We should not concentrate on who is right and who is wrong, but about what is really happening and where is the truth of the situation. We have a lot of misery in both North and South, and we need to care to our own people, not to care for a few politicians who would like to manipulate the situation for their own interest. And this is really what I think of the situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jacques.
Yes, I completely agree that, of course, religion is not compatible with transparent democratic processes. And I'm happy to say that in South Sudan, religion is not is not part of governing. The constitution is very clear of the separation of religion from state. The constitution is very secular. I mean, of course, when you say secular, do you mean the English common law, or do you mean which is also rooted in Christianity? So that is the only connection there is. It is the inherent historical roots of the Western legal system in the Christian faith, but there's no apparent requirement that the government has to go a certain particular religious line. The cultural representation. I was talking about the importance of chronicling celebration and display of all diverse cultural practices of South Sudan in such a way that every citizen sees themselves represented in this entity. And so that can only happen when you have cultural infrastructure, if you will, including cultural centers where people display the dancing arts, the music systems and all that, but also museums that display every aspect of cultural life, because art and cultural practices in South Sudan, like many parts of Africa, are functional. You don't produce an artwork necessarily for the sake of art. You produce it so that you can use it, whether it is used as a utensil or used for religious practices. And therefore, if you want to give South Sudanese, all of them, a sense that South Sudan is their overarching entity that they belong to, then they have to, these cultural practices have to be displayed in a very equitable way in the capital, Juba, and also the other state capitals. That has not happened yet. The South Sudan Ministry of Culture has just acquired a very central piece of land opposite, across the street from the John Garang Mausoleum, which we envision will become will house the National Museum. It will house the National Library. It will house the National Archives, the cultural centers with the theatrical art stage and with other kinds of performing art. So that area is where we envision these sort of things will happen. At the time of independence, the government of Norway was represented by the royal family, and as a gift to the independence of South Sudan, they have declared that they are going to help us establish our archives, which, by the way, is currently housed in a tent and being completely destroyed by the elements. In reference to the way forward, I can just talk about a particular challenge that we face, and I'm now talking as a civil servant in the government, and that is when it comes to economic development and to donor aid. One of the things we find ourselves in a bind. One, of course, we have to come up with a homegrown philosophy of development, a development that is people-focused, that we ourselves have developed and prioritized the needs of our people, and then say to the world that these are our priorities. These are absolute basic things that our people have to have. But we have only this much money to afford this. So if you are interested in helping us, this is what you help us with. So that in the end, whatever development program that come to pass is something that South Sudanese themselves have created. So that in the end, it is an answer to a question they themselves asked, rather than the way it has always happened, where you wait until some generous donor country says, here, I have $200 million, you can have it on this condition, on that condition. And then you run around trying to find out what to do with the $200 million. So I think it is important that you have this philosophy. The problem with this is that for a young country that is vying for world attention and for generosity and largesse of the world, you don't want to be seen to be too controlling, because then people will say, we give you money, we give you, along with this money, some conditions. So you cannot be too liberal in what you do with the money. So which way do you go as a young country? Do you take Western aid with all the conditionalities that come with it? Or do you say, enough is enough, if you want to help me, this is what you help me with, and nothing else? And that is where we are currently. There's no question that South Sudan has to wean itself from dependency on oil. And the way to do it is to as the Southern Sudan Development Plan stands today, is to take this money, this oil money, to fire up the engine of all the other sectors, particularly the agricultural sector, in order for the economy down the line at the end of the development plan, which is 3 years now, and there is South Sudan 2040, which is modeled after Rwandan plan. Whether it will achieve all these goals, of course, it's only to be seen. It's also subject to fluctuations, as Mr. Friedman mentioned correctly, that it is subject to fluctuations in the global economy. We are not an island. No matter how much oil you produce, oil prices also go down. And oil prices need good management. We used to have something called Southern oil stabilization account, which means that you keep the oil, you make an assumption that the oil price is going to be at a certain level. If it goes up, you save the money. If it goes down, you take that money and fill it up so that the oil, the plan remains at a particular level of oil price. If you do that, if you don't take the money that you save and you spend it on something else, you are good. But the tendency is that sometimes when other crises come up, you go and take that money and spend it. And then you have nothing to stabilize your oil price with. Those are things that a new country like South Sudan is learning. Fortunately, of course, it is a country that comes into existence with a great deal of hindsight when it comes to Africa. So there are so many things that you can choose from, so many experiences of other countries that you can say, that one has not worked in that country, this one has worked, and I'll do it, and I'll take it. Just for your information, even before the independence of South Sudan, the government of Sudan applied to join the East African East African Common Market, which has now put the greater East African community into a serious bind. Of course, South Sudan was almost a natural member. It was only there for the asking. But for North Sudan to become a member of this community has a serious challenge. On the one hand, of course, you want Sudan to join because that's 34 million people. That's a huge market. You can't say no to it. But if you do, if you admit Sudan before you admit South Sudan, what is South Sudan going to do? Are they going to join it still, or are they not? So there are all these things that are being worked out currently. The challenges are immense. Not to speak of our own problems with corruption and mismanagement and lack of capacity within the South. These are things that you learn as you go by. But we have the hindsight of the experience of the other countries to allow us to move forward beyond the current stalemate of relations between North and South. There's no way South and North cannot work together if they wish to ever become prosperous.
Thank you very much. We're really a little bit pressed for time. If people can be very quick, and I do want to give our friends from the Sudanese embassy a chance to comment if they wish, not forcing them. But meanwhile, there is a gentleman here. Very quickly, please, sir, because we're...
Yes, Rick Houghton from Afrix. Since it's important for North and South to work together economically, have sanctions outlived their usefulness? Where do you think we are in that?
Okay, and then there's a lady at the back. And there was somebody over here. Yeah.
Thank you. Just a small thing. You were telling about the Northerns and the Southerns have to work together. I'm a history student from a small town in Germany called Erfurt, and we have the honor that since 2 months we have a small Sudanese restaurant in this very small city, and it's always full of students who love the food. And we had to find out after many small talks with the restaurant owners, which are 3 men, that 3 of them are from Sudan and from different parts of Sudan, from north and south and from the middle. So that's about northern and southern part have to work together. Yes, I had to keep myself short. Just a small story. What is also happening outside Sudan, that people understand that on a pragmatic scale they have to work together, and we felt like that those men who are working in this restaurant do not really want to realize that they are separated, and they don't want to be separated actually, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a last question there.
I was just wondering, what is the role of education in nation building, and where is South Sudan, I guess, in the planning process? Like, how how do you build schools and hire teachers and decide what to teach? Thank you.
That's another 2 hours worth. I had one comment which might perhaps serve as a peg for the panel to use for some concluding remarks, and that was, I thought, the very moving poem that Tim read an excerpt of from the late Yusuf Kua, where he talked about extending the hand of friendship and reconciliation. When I first met Yusuf Kua in the 1990s, he impressed me at once as the only warlord from any faction of any part of Sudan who ever started a conversation with me by referring to some need of his people. And he, almost before I'd said who I was, he said, "Can you give me 3,000 shots of measles vaccine? We've got a problem in the Nuba Mountains, children dying." And it seems to me that what Sudan desperately needs is more of that approach and less of the warlords. I can't resist adding, thanks to Tim's picture, that I now know that Peter Gadet has put on a great deal of weight since I last saw him 8 years ago. Gentlemen, we'll leave perhaps Tim to have the very last word. So, Jock, would you like to go, and then okay. Nuruddin?
There is no question that Sudanese always work together when they are outside Sudan. In fact, it was quite surprising when the peace talks began in Abuja in the 1990s, in Abuja, Nigeria, 2 rounds, that the delegation from the SPLM was led by Mansour Khalid and Yasser Arman, who are from the north. The NCP delegation was led by a bishop called Rorich. And so the mediators were saying, a northern delegation led by a southerner and a southern delegation led by a northerner, what's the problem? And so there is no question that working together, because once we are outside Sudan, there is no escaping the burden of being a Sudanese. The one thing that I can say about education, of course, the project that I was talking to you about, the cultural project, can only work in collaboration with all the other sectors of government, particularly education, because what you want to do in the end is to identify certain values that societies go by, and then instill them in the generations that follow. And you can only do this through education, through a curriculum. So there is a South Sudan curriculum, national curriculum. And it includes history, it includes values, it includes cultural practices. Instead of children in South Sudan learning their alphabet using the camels and the horses that don't exist in South Sudan, they are now using the objects from the surrounding environs in order for them to. There is also education, and there's now a talk about having a national language program, because we have 67 different languages. I mean, what are we going to teach? So there are going to be some national languages, some that have been elevated to a certain level where they are called national languages, not to eradicate the rest. You're going to teach them in schools up to 4th grade, and then English will take over. So you will have 3 languages, in fact, in South Sudan. You will have the native tongue that is spoken in the local area, and then you will have English, which will be the language of government and instruction in higher education, and then you have a lingua franca, which is most likely going to be a version of Arabic. And this is what is going to be used in order to create that sense of identity in the younger generation. And that can only be achieved if the Ministry of Youth works with the Ministry of Culture, if the Ministry of Education works, if the Ministry of Information, if all other sectors of government collaborate. And this is a generation, this is a project for a whole generation. It's not something that you can achieve overnight. It will take 30, 40 years before this happens. And I hope that the government commits itself to this program in terms of availability of resources, but also in terms of laws. Because one of the challenges that we are facing in South Sudan today is when you don't have definite laws defining the boundaries of every kind of activity, you end up having the government officials inventing things as they go along. Right now, because there is not a whole lot of criticism against the government yet, because it's only 2 months old, the government is not under fire in order to institute certain laws that define the boundaries of every practice. But if they don't do it now, 10 years from now, they will not do it anymore, because it will mean that they are being held to the laws that they made. But they would like many examples in Africa, from Eritrea to Ethiopia to Uganda to Rwanda. The examples show that when the criticism becomes too intense, the government becomes very heavy-handed, and it can only be held back if there was a law. And at that point, they will not be interested in making laws anymore, because that means they will have to uphold the laws. Thank you.
Nuruddin.
Yeah, well, about the Sudanese working together, I think they do work together. Better outside than inside, no doubt about that. But even inside, there were some examples of Sudanese working together. I have begun the example of Charles Maniang, and I have many memories of many of my colleagues whom I have seen as Sudanese and not as Southerners. Even now, when I meet with them, for me, they are Sudanese. And the problem, when politics, mixes itself, interferes in this affair, then it becomes problematic. And it's politics that is, keeping people away from each other. But in everyday life, when they are working together, they are living together, things are completely different. Education, of course, as I said earlier, is the link between the past and the future, and how we give we empower our young people in order to give them, as a friend of mine said, to give them the key to the world. And giving them the key to the world means a lot of things. Certain values, certain skills, certain tap on their talents, and see how they can live together, work together, relate to each other, open up to the world, open up to others. And what we in UNESCO, we say educating for living together. And this is very important now in our countries. It's extremely important. I remember that when I was UNESCO representative in Kenya about 10 years ago, a little bit more maybe, the SPLM, it was William Ater, who was in charge of education at that time, and he came to see me and he said, Sati, we would like to have the curriculum of North Sudan for some of our schools. Even at that time, when there were really acute problems and all that, there was the will in order to. But education is important also if the curriculum would like to impose certain things that people do not see that they relate to. And in our case, it's very important that the North has committed many mistakes in the educational policies in the South. There is no doubt about that. As an educationalist, as a UNESCO man, I have always been saying that. We could have done it differently. We could have done it better. There could have been more consultations in the way that education was organized in the North. From a personal perspective, I wish my friend here well in his work and culture. As a UNESCO man, I'm ready also to help whatever I can do in order to help him in what he's doing. And the UNESCO General Conference is soon, so I think that will be also an opportunity where we can work in order to see how we can help the South in order to come to benefit from some of these services. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tim.
I think traveling around Sudan for the last 5 years, people have invited me into their homes with great warmth and kindness, and one of the very difficult things to reconcile living and working in Sudan is the incredible hospitality and warmth and kindness that exists with the incredible brutality that also exists within the country. And the more than 2 million dead, and it's a very, very difficult thing to reconcile. I'm a bit worried about how the separation is going to affect, because it's very easy to demonize the other. And when I have shown pictures around, whether it's in the south or in the north, people are shocked to see how similar they look to each other, how similar the people in Wau look to the people in Jonglei, because they've never been, and that they're not that different after all. And that as people, when I was going around and seeing my authors and presenting the book, one was very upset, and when he was looking through the book, he was almost on the verge of tears, saying, "This is the Sudan that I remember, but it's not the Sudan that's outside my door." And he wanted to go back to his village, and it seemed like he wanted to just go back and retreat. And I was trying to think of what was a parallel, and it was kind of like someone who was talking about a child who had died. And I think that as long as exchanges can take place and people can get to know and see that diversity, then there is an opportunity to forge some understanding.
Tim, thank you very much, not least for giving us the opportunity to engage in this conversation and to see the images which are so beautifully reproduced in your book. Before everybody stampedes to buy the last copy of Tim's book, which is still outside, please join me in thanking not only Tim but Jock and Nuruddin for a very stimulating afternoon.